Welcome to the broadcast. We come to you this evening from Washington, D.C. at the Bloomberg studios for a conversation with Tom Friedman. He just received his first Pulitzer for commentary and his third overall.
Israel's core dilemma is it cannot stay in the territories.
And be a Jewish democracy.
And be a Jewish democracy and be a stable society. It cannot
the
stay
formula
there.
you have suggested, and others you have suggested, certainly in your columns, is that Israel has to withdraw. It cannot stay there. But that the Palestinians are not yet prepared to be able to simply take over up to the 1967 boundaries, and there has to be either UN or NATO troops until the Palestinians have gotten to a certain point.
Yeah, I believe, Charlie, basically Israel's core dilemma right now, let's look at it from Israel's perspective for a second, then we can look at it from the Palestinian perspective. Israel's core dilemma is it cannot stay in the territories.
And be a Jewish democracy.
And be a Jewish democracy and be a stable society. It cannot stay there. But I don't think it can just pick up and leave. But my fundamental point is if Israel cannot stay and it cannot leave, then clearly we need a third party who can come in and basically stabilize the border between wherever Israel stays and wherever it leaves. And I believe the only third party, I believe we need a UN mandate basically to actually have a new mandate for a Palestinian state. But in the West Bank, Gaza, and whatever parts of East Jerusalem are negotiated between Israelis and Palestinians, and that you would have NATO, not UN troops, but NATO troops that would actually control the frontier in cooperation with Palestinians, and Palestinians would be responsible for their own internal security. The NATO presence there would ensure that no Palestinian state can import heavy weapons that could threaten Israel. And from the Palestinians' point of view, they would ensure that Israel couldn't threaten the Palestinian state.
Any reading as to whether the two parties would accept that? Israelis have always rejected the idea of soldiers from outside because they thought it would be
and I understand that. I understand
used against them later.
So I understand why Palestinians would reject it. I understand why Israelis would reject it. I think this idea is going to grow on people. I think it's going to grow on people. First of all, I'm struck at how many Arab diplomats have told me, let's keep pushing that idea, you know, because I think people realize that we need some kind of deus ex machina here, number one. It's easy to stand back and say, hey, that's not stable. You can't have UN troops. The two parties themselves should voluntarily just resolve to live properly side by side. Well, that would be great. I'd love that. But it's not going to happen. It couldn't happen in Bosnia. Couldn't happen in Kosovo. It required UN troops. Couldn't happen in Cyprus. And it's not going to happen in this place, at least overnight. And I believe, at a minimum as a transition, you need that kind of trusted third force.
Daniel 9. and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed, and he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator, on the desolator, on the desolator.
Chapter number 2, verse 3 and 4, it says that the man of sin, the Antichrist, will sit in the temple of God, claiming to be God. You can't sit in the temple if there isn't any temple. And then in Revelation chapter number 11, verse 1 and 2, it specifically states there that John was told to measure the temple, but do not measure the outer court of the temple, because it'll be trodden down of the Gentiles for 42 months. So get the picture. There's going to be a temple, you're to measure it, but don't measure the outer court. That's going to be under Gentile control. It's talking about a sharing arrangement of the holy places.
2 Thessalonians chapter number 2, verse 3 and 4, it says that the man of sin, the Antichrist, will sit in the temple of God, claiming to be God. You can't sit in the temple if there isn't any temple. And then in Revelation chapter number 11, verse 1 and 2, it specifically states there that John was told to measure the temple, but do not measure the outer court of the temple, because it'll be trodden down of the Gentiles for 42 months. So get the picture. There's going to be a temple, you're to measure it, but don't measure the outer court. That's going to be under Gentile control. It's talking about a sharing arrangement of the holy places. So the Bible paints a picture of the nation of Israel in agreement with the international community, and the leader of the international community, a man the Bible calls by 6 or 7 names, specifically though you probably know him as the Antichrist. Israel will enter into an agreement with the international community, and the result of that agreement will be the building of Israel's third temple. Then she will resume animal sacrifices once the temple is finished. This will cause all kinds of problems, and then the Antichrist will stop those sacrifices, tell the Jewish people they do not need them anymore.
Get me the Israeli Prime Minister on the line and have the jet ready for Israel.
I'm telling you, no, I won't agree. No, I want it understood that we will not give up one more grain of sand. My people will not stand for it.
Gentlemen, please. I understand your fears over hidden agendas. But Chairman Alexander is a reasonable man. A giver, not a taker. Gentlemen, let's not get hung up on negatives here. Chairman Alexander has given his wealth to the world. He wants to give it to you.
And as a show of good faith, I would like to make to you all a proposition. I am very pleased and proud to announce a 7-year peace treaty that not only secures the borders of Israel, but grants to the Palestinian people an independent state.
In a meeting with NATO Deputy Secretary General Alessandro Minuto Rizzo in Brussels, Minister for Strategic Affairs Avigdor Lieberman discussed deploying NATO forces in the Gaza Strip in order to prevent arms smuggling into Gaza and maintain order. The two also discussed issues of intelligence cooperation between Israel and NATO and the Iranian nuclear threat.
Headline News, December 7th. I'm Margot Dudkevich. Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni is expected to discuss the idea of the deployment of a NATO force in the region in talks with NATO Secretary General Jaap de Hoop Scheffer in Belgium over the weekend. The idea of a NATO or international force deployed in Gaza has been raised on a number of occasions over the past year.
A growing tie between NATO and the IDF, a group of NATO boats came to Israel recently for joint exercises. 3 NATO boats joined up with 2 Israeli missile ships, the INS Lahav and the INS Keshet. The Israeli ships showed off their naval capabilities. The two sides later exchanged information on a broad range of topics. For the first time, the Israeli Navy posted an officer at NATO's naval headquarters in Naples. Sending an officer to the HQ is a big deal. It means Israel will be brought up to speed on NATO events.